I've been seeing a lot of videos lately on YouTube, as well as some other websites, with questions of a sort of generic nature about ultrasonic cleaners of the consumer variety. In other words, not built to the standards of industrial ultrasonic cleaners, but the affordable ones. Harbor Freight has some Vevor or Vevor, I'm not sure how to pronounce it. A Chinese company has a lot of them, and it seems like the majority of confusions and requests for information I've seen have been about the Vevor model. So since I own one, I've decided to make what's going to be hopefully a very short video with my attempt to explain some of these things. The machine I'm using here is a recent one from early 2026. This is apparently their third or fourth version of the series. That's the Vevor series. This iteration has a stainless steel case or enclosure which has got a blackening finish on it, so it looks black, but it's very reflective like a mirror. And also the control panel is of a black material. The earlier Vevor ones had what was more obviously stainless steel enclosures with a blue colored control panel. So those are older versions apparently. I don't think it makes much difference. I think that's just styling. However, this version with the black finish does have some extra features, and I will go into that. The rest of these comments I'm going to make are more generic to Vevor machines and mostly to other brands as well. I'm also going to point out that while in the photos this black finish Vevor series of ultrasonic cleaners looks pretty, in reality I think they kind of look like crap. This particular finish shows dust, fingerprints, any slight water stain or anything. It just really amplifies it, and in reality it doesn't look like a nice clean shiny black surface. It shows everything. I can't get an angle here where it's not reflecting everything nearby in my shop. So if you don't need the extra features that this black series has, you might actually want to go with one of the older models. They're still apparently being made and sold with just the regular stainless steel, or there's I think the version that came before this has stainless steel with either a silk screened textured finish or an actual textured finish. That might be the best bet in terms of just appearance in the real world. I just want to go in briefly into how ultrasonic cleaning works. This is going to be the watered down version, because actually there's a bit of physics involved. Ultrasonic cleaning works by agitating the water or other liquid you put into them at ultrasonic frequencies, usually around 40 kilohertz. The agitation consists of the pressure in the liquid repeatedly decreasing and increasing at a rapid rate. As the pressure decreases, microscopic, or at least very tiny, bubbles will form, filled with the vapor from the liquid. As the pressure increases, the bubbles implode as the vapor is forced back into the liquid state. This is called cavitation. The very abrupt implosion of the tiny bubbles creates tiny yet violent shock waves which impinge on the adjacent materials, in other words, whatever you're trying to clean. And this is what does the cleaning by physically breaking down surface crud, etc., or knocking rust off and other things. It's like pelting it with microscopic little BBs, except it's liquid. Most of the extra features on this version of the machine, and these are the ones that add these three buttons on the Vevor models, have to do with the finer points of the ultrasonic cleaning, and I'll get into that in just a moment. So a quick overview of the machine physically. Control panel, You're probably going to have some sort of display for temperature if it's a heated unit. Some of the less expensive ultrasonic cleaners do not have built-in heaters, but I think the majority of the Vevor models have it. There are some very basic ones that just have knobs and things that maybe don't have that, but those are dirt cheap. The ones that you're most likely to encounter have the digital display of temperature setting and actual measured temperature, and then a counter for how long you want to do the ultrasonic cleaning. Buttons to control the temperature and time, and then start-stop buttons for the heat, start-stop buttons for the other features related to ultrasonic cleaning. That's the whole controls. The electronic controls on the front panel aren't able to handle AC power, so you need to have a separate power switch. And most of these models, certainly all the Vevor ones, all the other ones I've seen, have usually around on the back, place for the power cord to come in, and the actual power switch to the entire device. And the Vevor ones, this lights up when it's turned on, and then that turns on the control panel so the displays become active and the touch buttons on the front start working. Something else I wanted to mention, I've seen a lot of people referring to the machines, especially the Vevor ones, just for example as 15L, as if that's a model number. That's a capacity. This particular machine is a 15-liter capacity in its water tank. And 15 liters is roughly 4 gallons, just a little bit less than 4 gallons, so that gives you a frame of reference. They make them larger than this, they make them smaller than this, but if you just say, for example, with the Vevor product 15L, thinking that's the model number, it isn't. But don't feel bad, because Vevor does nothing to improve that on their website or other publicity or marketing. They make you think that's the model number until you actually get the product and find out, for example, this model is KZ-F15. So just be cautious of that if you're trying to give somebody specific information about which model you're talking about. The ultrasonic cleaners typically have lifting handles. One here, so that's, you can pick it up and move it, or you can pick it up and tip it if you have to. Although, and this is a critical point, these less expensive models, the non-industrial models, are not water sealed. There's air vents here and here. There's a big air vent on the bottom with a cooling fan. Lots of places for water to get in and get the electronics, which are all sitting on the bottom panel in here, to get those wet, and that'll fry these units if you get water inside of them. The biggest place to get water in, however, is right under the lip of the tank. This is the tank. It's a one-piece stamped stainless steel tub, and it just sort of curls over with this lip here, and that sits down on top of the sheet metal edge of the case. There isn't really any seal in there. The Vevor manual and pretty much all the other ones I've seen for commercial grade or non-industrial grade machines say do not pour the liquid in the tank out by tipping the cleaner over, because some of that liquid, as it pours over, unless you tip it very suddenly and at a great number of degrees tipped, is likely to wick back up underneath this and run down inside the machine. And the Vevor manual is at pains to say don't do that, use the drain. And indeed, pretty much all of these have a drain, just like a bathtub or a sink. It has a little screen there so little parts won't go down it, but all it does is goes through an L-shaped pipe and comes out the side with a ball valve. That's open, that's closed, and then there's a fitting there where you can thread on a pipe, a tube, a hose, whatever you want to do to get the fluid out to a floor drain or a sink or a bucket or a water jug or whatever. There's still a little water in there. So that's an important caution. They also suggest and recommend that you don't put this thing in a sink to fill it with the tap. Just having the active water in a inexhaustible supply coming down on this thing, if it starts overflowing, some of that water can wick back up underneath and get inside. It's much better to fill these in the place where you're going to use them by filling them with a jug, you know, like from 1 gallon water bottles or something like that, than to put it in a tap. Now, if you've got a hose with a valve on it and you can bring that over, put it in there, fill it up, take it out, that's probably okay. Just be aware that there are issues with filling and emptying these if you do it by tipping or any place where water can go over the edge. These Vevor cleaners, at least the more recent ones, come with a nylon fitting to thread into here, and it has a hose barb on it, and it comes with a length, I don't know what that is, it's 2.5 feet long or something, of PVC hose, and it doesn't fit super tight on there, but it works enough for draining. So you thread this in here finger tight and put the hose down in a sink or whatever you've got. You could drain it into a bucket, like a 5-gallon bucket, and then take that and dump it somewhere. They also give you some Teflon tape. I don't think it's strictly needed. There's only going to be water here when you're draining, not the rest of the time, because the ball valve would be closed normally and there won't be anything here except a drop or two of water. But if you wanted to, you could put Teflon tape on there. I don't, because I'm taking it off all the time for storage. I want to try to clear up the capacity thing. This is a 15-liter cleaner, but Vevor is not at all specific about what that exactly means. And they do talk about never overfill it, don't go beyond the maximum marking. Well, there is nothing in these tanks that says maximum. There's not a embossed line that says max next to it or anything like that. They're just not helpful in that regard. They also say do not fill it less than 2/3 of its full capacity, which on here, you know, what's full capacity? The only way to find out is to put in the requisite number of liters or gallons and see where that comes to. I'm thinking it's going to come to this line on the stamping. I think that's what that is. I think that's supposed to be max. This is what I meant earlier by filling these from a jug. But if you're not careful with this, you can still splash water up on the rim, in which case it could wick around inside the enclosure, so you still have to be careful. That's 1 gallon, and this should take nearly 4 gallons if I understand the capacity correctly. Well, this is 3 gallons, as closely as I could measure it using my gallon jug, and it comes right up to that stamped line. This is the point I don't think it should be filled higher than. You also have to keep in mind that if you just fill it to this and then you put some parts in, say a big old carburetor or something like that, that's going to displace, you know, 1/2 gallon of water maybe, and the water could come up and overflow. So, you know, for especially large items that will displace a lot, you have to be careful and not just plop them in here without paying attention to the level, and that it should not probably get higher than that. I'm thinking if I put in the extra gallon, bring it up to 3.9 gallons, it would probably go right to the rim. So I'm guessing that when Vevor at least says this is a 15-liter device, which is 3.9 gallons if I remember correctly, that's probably going to bring it right up to the rim, and you can't do that. That's too high. So now I'm going to drain this to show how that works. Turn the valve. There is a little dripping here. In my situation, it's not a bad thing. It just drips on a concrete floor and evaporates. But if that was important to you, you probably would want to use the Teflon tape. It doesn't drain super fast. Depending what you're cleaning and what kind of solution you're using, if it's just water with or water with soap, dish soap for example, or if you're just putting simple green in here, or gasoline, or whatever you're doing, you know, always be conscious of where you're draining it into. You know, if it's not basically water, you shouldn't be putting it into the drain. You should be pouring it somewhere appropriate. Also, if you're getting, you know, scum and gunk in here, if there's particulates, they're not going to necessarily run out just because of the draining action. When it gets near the bottom and the thing isn't too heavy, you can pick up one end of the handle a little bit, you know, and entice it to flow towards the drain. It's still a little bit full for that, but you can definitely do that. And it's good to have another jug of water around to just kind of flush it out, do a rinse after you've drained it. You're going to be left with a little bit like this, and once it gets down to this point, you can probably just go ahead and tip it, or use a rag or some paper towel to mop up that little bit of remaining water. Most of these ultrasonic cleaners come with a lid for the tank. I've seen some that don't, but it's a good thing to have. Number one, you might keep cleaning solution in this all the time. You know, if you're working with a lot of mechanical parts and you're throwing them in here to clean the grease and crud off of them, you might not necessarily have to be changing the fluid every time you use it until it gets pretty grody. You don't want that evaporating more than necessary. You don't want the cat going into there thinking it's water and getting poisoned. You know, a lot of things can happen. Also, objects can fall into it, causing damage. So it's good to keep the lid on it whenever it's not in use, and even when it's in use, keep the lid on it. When you're ultrasonic cleaning, it's always advised to keep the lid on it. The act of the ultrasonic cleaning can cause some of the fluid to be gassing out, to vaporize on the surface, and you'll keep it back inside the tank if you have the cover on it. And when you're done, assuming you're not leaving your cleaning solution in here all the time, if you're an occasional user like I am, you're going to put it away on a shelf. You really do want to just give it a good wipe so you don't get staining and so on the stainless steel. I doubt this is the highest grade stainless steel at this price point. It probably can get some staining. So again, best to give it a good wipe out with some paper towel. I also saw a lot of confusion about whether you can put things right in the tank. Now, I've been using industrial ultrasonic cleaners most of my life, and none of them had anything in their manuals or in the operations I saw, you know, for years and years and years, that said you can't put something in the tank. It was routine to put small objects right in the tank. However, it's probably a good idea to buffer the things you're cleaning from the bottom of the tank or the sides of the tank if you have the option to do it. It's not going to make things worse, and it might make things better. Again, but I've used things in ultrasonic cleaners for a long time, and it didn't seem to hurt them. And indeed, the Vevor manual says, while it's recommended to put the objects being cleaned in the wire basket or something, you can still put them on the bottom of the tank. It comes right out and says it, not in those exact words, but that's what it's saying. So they're not saying don't do it. The Vevor machines come with a wire basket sized to fit the tank. The main advantage to these that I'm aware of is that it makes it easier to take things out of the tank when you're done. And the liquid drips off, and you come over here and you could set it down on a table. I think that's the more critical function of this wire basket than keeping things off the bottom. Sometimes there'll be stuff floating on the top and you don't even know where to reach around in here and, you know, get at the items to pull them out. Another advantage of the wire basket is if you put your items to be cleaned in the basket and then lower it down inside, you've removed the chance of objects falling into the tank and hitting the bottom. That is a no-no. There are ultrasonic transducers on the bottom of this. The 15-liter Vevor one has 6 transducers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and they're just glued onto the bottom of the tank with some adhesive that's appropriate to the task. But they do caution strongly, if you drop things, like if you were cleaning a carburetor and you happen to let it slip out of your fingers and fall into this, it could break the glue bond to the transducer or transducers and essentially ruin the machine. Or maybe it dents it, it's fairly thin sheet metal. You know, it's not going to be to your advantage to let things fall into here. Putting them into the basket and then putting the basket in with its little rubber feet is a good idea for those kinds of reasons. What if this is too big and little parts you've got will fall right through the wire mesh? At least the Vevor machines give you a tea strainer or a coffee strainer. I think it's a tea strainer, where you could put like tea leaves into this, close it up, and then put it in a cup to make your own tea, you know, or coffee. So these things come in different sizes. They give you one size with the Vevor machines. All the models I'm aware of have it. And this just opens up, there's a little catch on the side, and it's just a small wire basket. You can put tiny little parts, little pieces of jewelry or whatever in there, and then you could set it on the bottom. You could put it in the wire basket and put the wire basket in the tank, whatever. But that's what that's for. I've seen some people say, what's this weird little thing for? I don't get it. Now you would know. Okay, now I'm going to be talking about the control panel on the Vevor machines. This is specific to the Vevor machines and more so to this later version with the extra controls, but the way I'm going to present the information, it should apply to practically any model by any maker, at least ones with digital displays and heaters built in. And you could just ignore the part about the heater if your model doesn't have that. Something that you may notice in a lot of videos if you look at them is people complaining about how hard it can be to read these displays. Now I can read these in real life just standing here much better than it shows up in the camera. That's partially because digital cameras, most of them anyway, don't respond well to the wavelength of red light coming out of your typical red LED displays. It just freaks with their image sensors or something, and it just doesn't pick it up very well. So the naked eye picks it up much better than it looks here. But here's the thing, I haven't seen a Chinese manufacturer yet who uses red LEDs with a filter. They're supposed to be used with filters, and they just, like, they don't get it. Nobody's ever told them about it or something. You think they'd wise up? You know, if you had an old pocket calculator from the 70s, they'd already figured out they need to have red filters for best clarity. So if these things are causing you grief, I would suggest that go to Amazon or your local lighting and theatrical supply company, whatever, and buy some red gel filters. It's just red plastic film that's red. And you cut out a piece of it and you put it over the front and tape it down or whatever you want to do, and it'll make these things just pop. The legibility, visibility of the LED displays will dramatically improve, and it'll be viewable easily under more lighting conditions instead of having to go around and try to get the lighting and the angle just right to see it clearly. I considered trying to retrofit this one with a filter on the inside, but the way they've got this assembly mounted to the case, it looked like there was too much chance of breaking something trying to get a filter in on the inside, so I'm not going to worry about it that much. But you could improve these on yours if you put some red filter material over the front of that one way or another. So I'm going to do a lot of this now zoomed in so I don't just see my reflection on it more than necessary. It's really hard to get this so you can see what I'm looking at. Actually, this is about the best. If I hold it like this, at least in my camera viewfinder, that's the clearest I can make the display look. So this is the heater section. 2 digits to display the desired liquid temperature in the tank and the actual measured liquid temperature in the tank. It doesn't actually do that because the temperature sensor is glued onto the bottom of the tank on the bottom of the sheet metal. So it's actually telling you the temperature of the bottom of the tank rather than the temperature of the fluid. And if you just go in the top with a thermometer and stick it in, you're going to get a different reading than this. I found out in my own tests that this differed between 4 and 5 degrees C, which is considerable error. So don't take this with a grain of salt. If it's really important to you to know the temperature before you put something in here, measure it with a thermometer into the liquid from the top. Don't believe this. But this will at least get you in the ballpark of where it's shooting for. It's not a high precision instrument here. You can increase the temperature, and again, this will only affect this directly. 1 button push to increase, 1 button push per degree to decrease. If you hold it, it goes up fast, just like on a wristwatch if you're setting it. So you can scroll it fast or you can step it. When you turn it on with this button, it's going to turn on the heater. Now this is a point where I should say something that I forgot to say earlier. Never ever run an ultrasonic cleaner with nothing in the tank. It will destroy it. The transducers get hot and they lose their heat through the tank into the fluid, and it acts like a heat sink. There will be, on the industrial ones can do better, but these commercial ones for home use and light industrial use don't have things to cool the transducers really, other than just the cooling fan that's on the inside, which helps, but more expensive ones have better cooling, let's put it that way. You don't want those to overheat, and the instruction manuals will say don't run these continuously for more than an hour, for example. That's, I think, boilerplate on the Vevor manuals. They say 1 hour maximum, and then let it have a rest for a while to cool down. They recommend just a few minutes of rest will do the trick. You just don't want to be doing, I think this goes up to 30 minutes on the timer, so you could do 2 concurrent 30-minute batches, and then that should be it until you let it cool off. Supposedly this has a built-in feature where it'll shut itself off or prevent it from starting if it's getting too hot. I haven't verified that personally, but it's vaguely mentioned in the manual. Anyway, so you can set the temperature, and then you push the button once to start the heater and once to stop the heater. It's a toggle on, toggle off. This button does not influence the ultrasonic part of the machine, only the heater. And eventually you'll see the temperature creep up. It does take quite a while. It's not a very powerful heater. And if you're trying to heat up 3 or 4 gallons of liquid that's cold, or right out of the cold water tap, it could take 15 minutes or so before it gets the temperature up there. If you want to help that, fill it with something that's already near the right temperature. And by the way, here's a table I just made up for my own use. I think I'll stick it on my Vevor cleaner, going in 5-degree increments of Celsius from 20 up to 65. I show the equivalent Fahrenheit. So now for the more complicated part, the ultrasonic part of the machine. It has 4 digits. It's minutes and seconds. Because it's Chinglish, it says minute and second. There's also these little things that say on, degas, and semi-wave. I should have mentioned before that once the temperature gets up to the desired temperature, let's say you set it for 44 degrees Celsius and it slowly creeps up to 44 in the measured reading, Once it actually gets to 44, the heater's going to shut off until the actual temperature drops a bit, then it'll turn back on. So during operation, you may see a LED. On this machine, it's a blue LED. It's right by the word on next to the temperature display. That LED comes on to say when the heater's actually on. The LED goes off to say when it's not currently being powered. And you'll expect to see it turning on and off during operation, if you're running the heater at all. Now back to the ultrasonic part of it. You've got those 1, 2, 3 LEDs. If you don't have the fancier version, you'll probably just have a single LED, this one right here. You may not have these ones over here. This is the basic on for full wave operation of the transducers. And on the basic models, that's all you get is the full wave operation. It's the simplest, the most direct, the most traditional way of running it. And there will be a single button. It'll be this one here, and that'll be the on-off button. It'll look just like this for the ultrasonics. And when the ultrasonics are on, that LED over here will be on, saying that it's on. However, these more advanced models also have a semi-wave mode, which basically, if you think about the way the ultrasonic transducers are agitating the liquid, it's almost like a speaker in a stereo system or something like that. When it's giving it a positive current or positive voltage, it pushes outward, so it's a pushing action. And then when it gives it a negative voltage or current, it's more like a pulling action. It pulls back in instead of just being released from being in the out position or being the push position. So let's look at it this way. This is its basic position. It gets a positive signal, it pushes. It gets the positive signal removed, it goes back to its normal position. Then you give a negative signal and it pulls. You release the negative signal, goes back to its normal neutral position. If you're giving it an alternating signal, it'll be pushing, pulling, pushing, pulling, like that. That's full wave operation. But if you don't want to be quite as violent with the agitation, there's a semi-wave, or sometimes called half-wave, but on ultrasonic cleaners, semi-wave seems to be the more common terminology. It'll just go from neutral to push and back to neutral, so it's just doing this instead of this. It's basically cutting the amplitude of the agitation in half. But it doesn't change the violence by half. It's physics again, but what it really amounts to is in the semi-wave mode, the violence of the agitation is cut maybe 20 or 30%. I asked Vevor about it, and they said that in the semi-wave mode, the actual strength of the cavitation, which again is a key part in how these work, is reduced by about 20% when you're in the semi-wave mode. So far different from half the power of the cavitation, if you will. And that would have to do with how the electrical intensity is being translated into the intensity of the cavitation. And I'm sure there's other things in the formula if you're calculating it, and that's why it's not 50%, that it's maybe a 20% reduction in intensity. The semi-wave mode is mostly used when you're cleaning things which are delicate, and like maybe some kinds of jewelry or dentures or something, and that might be damaged by the full force of the agitation, and you can put in semi-wave mode and it cuts back on it some. Think of this as the delicate mode. You wouldn't use it on most metal parts, you'd use the full wave mode. And just like the on-off switch over here, this toggles on and off. If you're running semi-wave mode, you push it once to turn it on, push it again to turn it off, and it'll light up the LED next to semi-wave. If you use the full wave button, you push it once to turn it on, push it again to turn it off, and the LED over here by on will illuminate. Well, there's also this feature called degas, or I've heard people say degas, like it's a Spanish name or something. It's short for degas. Degasification, degassing, different ways of saying it. What it's doing is it's running it in full wave mode, and it's cycling through two different ways of doing the full wave mode. On these basic Vevor models, Vevor says they don't put it in their manual, but they told me that it's going 6 seconds on and 3 seconds off, 6 seconds on, 3 seconds off. So it's alternating between just being off and being in full wave mode. And that helps with degassing, which so the timer, when you're setting the time, it only sets the minutes. You can't set seconds. It's assuming it's 0. You can go up and down. You can hold the button, it'll scroll up to 30 and then reset to 0. And the same thing if you push the down button. Goes down from 30 to 0, goes back up to 30, and it wraps around. I think it defaults to 14 minutes. So you can set the time, but you can't set the seconds, only the minutes. When you actually start running the Ultrasonics, it starts counting down, and it counts down in minutes and seconds. You can actually see the progress instead of waiting for a whole minute to see the minutes part change. It gets a little confused if you stop partway through the timing cycle. The seconds keep running. At least on mine it does. I think that's a bug in the software. There's got to be a little microcomputer in here somewhere. Anyway, it's not a big deal. At the worst case, you'll be off by a minute. So a little bit more about the degas mode. Because it's using full wave, it'll actually illuminate 2 lights. It'll light the on light because it's in full wave, and it'll light an LED next to the word degas to show you that it's in degas mode. And you'll be able to hear it because it'll be bzzz, 6 seconds and then off for a few and then repeat. Let's see, I think that's all I have to say about that. Oh yes, any of these 3 buttons can toggle it off. So even if you used full wave button to start it, you could use degas or semi-wave to stop it. So any 3 will toggle it off, but only the appropriate button will toggle it on for the associated mode. So just out of curiosity, I opened up the bottom of my Vevor KZ-F15 Ultrasonic Cleaner and mapped out the wiring diagram just to answer a few questions about it that I had. So I'll just go through it real quickly here for anybody who's interested. You've got your normal IEC type power cord socket on the back. The middle pin is just connected to chassis ground. And then the hot side goes through the fuse that's built into the socket assembly and through the power switch, which is also on the socket assembly. And when the power is switched on, then the neon bulb is connected back to neutral, which is curiously the black lead, and therefore the bulb lights up when there is power connected and the power switch is on. That's all one assembly on the back panel. I think all the Vevor machines use the same assembly, although they may use a different fuse value. You come out of here with the red and the black wires, and they kind of daisy chain between 1, 2, 3 different circuit boards that are sitting on the bottom. I think, although I can't prove from personal experience, that probably all the Vevor models use some combination of these. I think the small ones that only use 2 transducers probably just use the first circuit board. It's a larger circuit board, has more stuff on it. And then if you use a bigger model that has 4 transducers, then 2 of them are controlled from that board, and then they would add this additional smaller board that Operates a couple more transducers on the bigger ones like this. Another board that's the same as this one to get a couple more transducers. If they have any that use 8 transducers, I wouldn't be surprised if they just add another one of these boards. Anyway, so the power daisy chains, except the neutral is not continued in the daisy chain. It goes only to this first board, and then apparently it's switched or modulated or something, and it comes out this connector that's called, instead of N for neutral, it's N-F, whatever that means. Neutral with a frequency, I don't know. Anyway, that comes out, and that's what daisy chains into the other two boards. So this first board handles the heater, or heaters, that warm up the tank and thus the water in the tank. It also handles the ultrasonic transducers, 2 of them. And it also is the board that communicates over a ribbon cable to the front panel assembly. This is a circuit board that has the displays on it and the several push buttons and indicator LEDs. So it's got some sort of microcontroller on it. This is probably what stipulates the frequency, probably what controls the pulsing on and off in degas mode, you know, various things like that. And communicates that stuff back to this board as need be. It also directly monitors the tank temperature on models that have a heater through a temperature sensor that's glued onto the bottom of the tank, connected up with 2 wires to this same board. And this board powers over 2 wires the small ventilation fan on the bottom of the case. I couldn't quite read the label on the fan on mine, but I thought it said 5 volts DC. So we get down to this first circuit board, and then the heaters are directly driven off of this. The neutral, I'm sorry, the hot is just daisy chained to all of the heater elements. There may be 1, there may be 2, there may be 3, maybe there could be more on the biggest ones, but they're all wired in parallel. And then the other side of the heating elements goes to a single connector on the same circuit board, so that's the one that's switched on and off to control the temperature. And then finally there is a output plus and output minus. Those are the signals that control the first 2 ultrasonic transducers, and they're wired in parallel off of those 2 wires. And now we have the neutral and the controlled hot, or the hot and the controlled neutral, whichever way it works out, and that feeds into the slave board, or the daughter board, through its L and whatever. I didn't see a marking on the circuit board for these, but this is where the power is coming in. And apparently also the intelligence for modulation. It's somehow switched or conditioned, or there's a signal riding on it or something. And then it also has an output plus and minus, and it controls the next 2 transducers wired in parallel. And then the same 2 daisy chain wires come down here to the third board, and it has its own output plus and minus, which run the last 2 transducers. Again, if you've got one with only 4 transducers, you wouldn't have this board and these 2 transducers, just be these 4. If you have one with only 2 transducers, then you don't have this board and these either. You would just have this board and the front panel board and a smaller number of heaters. I'm pretty sure that's the way it works out. Anyway, just in case anybody's interested in how it's wired up.